Right. Just to kind of summarize, to maybe do a little uh, recap from the week one. This is a beginner's drawing course, and it's inspired the most by these guys. So dynamic sketching, that's an obvious one. Then you have Vilppu's drawing manual. It's a great book, and you'll see the influence from that one in the week three, in the next week. Then there's Mike Mattis's Force, and I'm not a huge fan of Mike Mattis's drawing, but he's a really good teacher, and I did steal one exercise from him, and I did steal some of his ideas about, you know, if you can get your hands on this book, uh, the first few chapters are enlightening in some sense. So the later stuff, I think is not that good, but the first few chapters are really good. And then there's Keys to Drawing by Bear Dodson. That's We'll see a little more of that in this lesson, in this week, and then we'll put it away. So that's in summary. And uh, basically the goal, what we're trying to achieve here, is to turn you into some sort of a functional unit so that you can, grab all these materials and different materials. And when you open them, you actually know what you're doing. Like one example might be, uh, let me just find it. You may be familiar, some of you may be familiar with this book. It's by Michael Hampton, and it's probably the best figure drawing book that you can find um, on the market. And there's a little catch here. It has a downside. It's really, really advanced. Okay, so much more advanced than Vilppu's drawing manual, for example. So if you pick a book like this, um, it already assumes that you know a lot of stuff. It assumes that you have a good control over your lines. It assumes that you know how to make shapes look good, how to make them clear, and it assumes that you know how to draw volume. If you know all these things and pick this book, you'll learn a lot. Okay? If you don't and still pick this book, you can still go through it and think, man, I'm learning, but you won't be learning nearly as much as you could. You won't be getting the full potential from that material, for example. So, uh, after this course and after a lot of practice, I think that you will have that solid foundation that you can take on anything. Right. So in the previous lesson, in past week, we talked about a dot, and we used that dot to create a line. Now, in this lesson, we're going to add one more step towards complexity. If you take a line and enclose it, you get a shape. So a shape is the next step towards complexity. The same way, a line is the next step from a dot. So in today's lesson, we'll talk about shapes. We'll talk about what makes them good and what makes them not so good. what they can do for you, how to see them around you, and we'll talk about how to take a 3D scene and translate it into a 2D drawing, which is the next big step towards towards mastering the fundamentals. Not like you can actually master them, you just suck less and less until you don't suck as much. And that's progress. So again, an enclosed line is a shape, okay? Now, when you enclose a line, what you're doing is that you're suddenly creating something that's inside and something that's outside. So it's like its own thing now. If you have just a line and do a bunch of squiggles and just a huge mess, right? But a shape is kind of a self-sufficient unit like a building block. I have a little question here. So this is your canvas, and I've placed a square here, and the square is half the size of the big one. Okay. So how much of this square, like how much percent do you think is taken up by a shape? Anyone wants to take a guess?
Isn't that square a quarter of the big square?
It is. It's a trick question. So this square is a quarter of the big one, but if this is your canvas, that canvas is still filled to 100% with shapes. Here's one shape, and here's another shape. Let's add another shape. It's still 100%. Let's add one more. Still 100. So drawings and pictures in general, they're made entirely out of shapes. There's just no way you can not have that. What we have here are positive shapes and negative shapes, which are the kind of the spaces between them, but they're still shapes, like this whole thing. And maybe you could even see it as broken down into these chunks. Like this could be a negative shape if you just close that off. This could be maybe a triangle if you close that off, kind of simplify it. So it's just this huge collage of shapes. So we have shapes, and we now know that there are positive shapes and negative shapes. The positive shape is what's on the inside, and a negative is what's on the outside. So, for example, if you grab like a mug, now the positive shape would be something like this. And there's a negative shape. Actually, how many negative shapes are there with this mug?
Or two. Outside and then that little
Yep,
square right there.
yep, exactly. So you have one negative shape here, and you have one more here. Let's say you have that mug on a canvas. So you could make a perfectly good positive shape here, and you could make a perfectly good negative shape here. But if you take the whole mug and misplace it on the canvas, like jam it somewhere here in the corner, now you've messed up the negative shape. So it's still a bad picture, even though the mug drawing is the same. So now we're getting into framing and into composition. Let's take another example. Comic books. Comic books they really train your ability to make good shapes. So this is a strip from Mike Mignola's Hellboy. And Mike Mignola, if you know the guy, he's amazing at his shapes. Um, so let's take this one for example. You got the panel, and you have this kind of thing going on. So you got this huge shape, then you have a medium shape in here, and a small shape in there. But that's not everything. You also have another panel here, another panel, some more.
Hello.
Those are more shapes. Say what?
Um, was there a session last week Wednesday?
Uh, yeah, on Wednesday there was a short session where I did the demos for the first week, and I posted those in the workshop channel. There's an
Okay.
Imgur link where you can check them out. And
Was the class pre-recorded?
it was.
Alright.
If you check out the workshop channel on Discord,
Mm-hmm.
there's both a link to Imgur, where there's examples from the homework from week 1, and
Mm-hmm.
there's also a YouTube link to the class from the previous week.
Alright. Thanks for the info.
Yeah, no problem. Right. Okay, so you have the panels, and those are more shapes. You have negative shapes here between them. This whole chunk here is one more shape. Then there's this other shape here. And then there's a whole bunch of shapes in between there as well. So you get shapes within more shapes, and the whole shape bundle is on this shape of the page of the comic book. Okay, it's shapeception kind of. And now to fuck with you even more, if this was like a priced art piece worth, freaking millions, and it was placed in an art gallery, you would tape it like to a wall, along with some other works of art, like Mona Lisa there or something. And now there's one more shape. So that's the job of a curator, who's the person who's organizing gallery shows. They have to take into consideration the shape of all these different artworks and arrange them throughout the gallery in a pleasing way, right? So, man, That's a lot of shapes. So by now we probably know that shapes are everywhere. Like even if you have your piece of paper and you want to purposefully make a drawing that has no shapes and you just make a huge gross squiggle there, someone could still, walk in here and say, yeah, well, you've created this kind of like that, that, that. That's one shape. Then you have a negative shape here and there, and it's all enclosed by this negative shape here. You can't make a drawing without shapes. It's impossible. So, if there is such a thing as good shapes and bad shapes, then we definitely want to have the good ones in our drawings. So in the week 1, we learned that good drawings are made out of good lines. And in this week, we're going to learn that a good drawing is made out of good lines and good shapes. So are you guys following? Does it make sense so far?
Yeah, it's clear.
All right. So I'm going to ask you for like if we can together brainstorm the different properties, like uh, how can you categorize shapes? How do they differ from one another? But first, we'll have a little example. So some of these are from the past week. Still not very visible. Okay. So this is a drawing by Carter Goodrich. We've seen it before, and I mean, just look at this thing. Those are some really nice shapes. And he didn't enclose this one. It's kind of a one shape as a whole, the coat. But it's kind of implied that it's closed off here and creates this beautiful arc. One big shape here, medium there, and little small ones. It's also got this beautiful sweeping motion through it. This one is fairly obvious. And since we already talked about good lines, we talked about the CSI idea. Just you got a big C curve there and two S curves on those ends. And together it creates, because it's enclosed, it creates a good shape. One more cartoony example. I mean, just look at how different all these heads are. So you got This one. Even the eyes are like small shapes. This huge thing that chops off the top side of his head. Looks like a mushroom. These two are kind of similar because we usually there's less variation in faces on females in cartoons because it's kind of more perceived that there is a standard for beauty there. But this one has, chunkier hair, and this one has these long ears. Yep. It makes them read instantly. Right. This one is probably my favorite. So just look at the difference between these two characters. The kid, it's from the movie Up, and the kid, he's like a big huge round thing and very small at the bottom. He's like an egg or something. And an egg is a funny shape because it's easy to tip over. So he's always running around, and this guy, he's look at that firm stance. He's made out of these lots of rectangles. He lived in his house for so long that he almost looks like his house. It's like even his glasses. This is more of a landscape. One more here, one more here. So think about the different, I'm drawing these shapes almost mechanically, but they're all good shapes. So think about what makes them good. What do they have in common? There's styles that are entirely built on these shapes. So here it's fairly obvious. Like even the leg here. Like you would think that skin is like one hue, and there's just so much variation. The fabric as well. This is by Yun Lin. She's a great painter. These are some of her shoes. It's fairly straightforward. And this is a strange example because it has also very good shapes, but it has realistic rendering on top of that. So that's always a very strange combination. Like even the sea here. This is also a more realistic rendering. This is from Spider-Verse by Jeffrey Thompson. Right. Like if you squint your eyes, it looks like a photo. So, but I mean, look at the shape of this thing. who would manufacture such a piece? Like you don't see a door with a metal piece like that. So, well, the artist manufactured that. They thought that, you know, a rectangle, just a straight rectangle, is too boring. So instead they gave it a little push here and a little push there, just in this direction. So it's a rectangle, but it's a little more fun. Almost all these things have, you know, the realistic shape, but a little more fun, just a little bit. The tab here, this box there. This is from the same movie, the Spider-Verse. And I mean, look at these. And I think a huge appeal, like if you've seen that movie, you know that it's very visually appealing. And a huge reason for that is because they became mindful about designing their shapes, much more mindful than before. Uh, Sometimes people say that Eastern art is more appealing than Western art. Like if you compare Western comics and manga comics. Uh, and I think a large reason for that is because historically in the West, we, you know, in Renaissance, we figured out the rules of perspective. And since then, the main reason for painting has been to replicate reality. In the East, they don't care for that as much. Instead, they are mindful about the flat quality of their drawings. Uh, they kind of they admit that it's a shape and they want the shape to be good. This is another example of a very shape-heavy kind of workflow. Like this is even more pushed. I mean, look at this door frame. Like if you get that in IKEA, you want to return it. Look at this. It's really crooked, right? The perspective on this door is a little exaggerated. This corner is kind of a little too much. The bottle here is shifted towards that side. It's a bottle shape, but a little more fun, pushed in that direction. Same with this box. Exaggerated corners, exaggerated shape. This is from Safteruk Michael, again the same artist, and this is a sort of a still life, but very stylized, very pushed. I mean, the angle on this jar is like extreme angle with extreme perspective, but you know it's just a couple like half a meter away from you, so there's no way that's real. But you know it's a little pushed, a little more fun. As a still life to kind of get you excited for today's assignment later on. And this is much more realistic. This is from Sergei Kolesev, and he's a master painter. This is one of his more well-known pieces, but I want you to look at this shape in the background. You could simplify that as a simple C or maybe an S curve. And then there's this guy in the front. I mean, the shape is more complex than that. You know, you could just zoom in and go over every single bump there. You know, just But I think that's not what Master Kolesov meant here. He was more after a very simple statement, like the zebra here, or it's a massive zebra. I bet that, I really think that when he did this painting, before he did this painting, he started with like a composition thumbnail that may have looked something like that. That's the simple statement behind this painting. Another one from the same artist. And the figure is a really complex thing. A lot of you have kind of delved deep into figure drawing, so you know that. But he doesn't overcomplicate this. A little head there, so that we know there's a head in this spot. More shapes. But I don't want you to think about this as a box yet. Just think about it as a collection of shapes. This is a triangle here. This is a shape here. And together they may create the illusion of a box. But just look at it as a collection of shapes. This huge thing here. This creates this kind of wave emotion through the entire picture. And then you have the negative shape around it. So Kolesov is really famous for his really good shape design. I mean, just this guy, absolutely beautiful. And then this gun here kind of sticks out of that shape so that you notice it right away. You notice it right away because it breaks away from this big shape here. And you also notice it because it's surrounded by all this negative shape here, where there's basically nothing to look at. It's just,
Hey, can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
So is the artist consciously thinking about all the things you just said when you make this painting, or is it
Oh no,
like
no.
no? Okay.
He's that's a very good question. That's a really good question because we kind of addressed this in the previous lesson, where we had a picture of this great pianist. This one. So I don't know. Have you been here for the previous lesson?
Yeah, you were saying that the muscle memory over time, but you make the she makes the song not by thinking where her individual fingers go, but like it just kind of comes because it's art. That's the gist of what I got from that.
Yeah. I'm sometimes not very clear about my idea. So if something doesn't seem like it makes sense, maybe just raise a good question. So Sergei Kolesov is at Hiromi level. Okay, so what happens here is that there's the art and there's the craft. Okay, so the craft is a carpenter, like a good carpenter hammering nails or something, is the technical stuff. It's the how, and the art is the what. the message you want to communicate, the idea, the joke, the humor, the metaphor, the juxtaposition, and the contrast, the rhythm, the beauty, and all these things that you want to communicate when you draw. Like you may be thinking, oh man, I don't want to communicate any of that. Well, I don't think that's true. Like even like anything you draw, I think what you almost always want to communicate is that, hey, this is pretty. Like like you draw something and you want to make it pretty. I think that applies to almost, there's always exceptions, to almost anything we draw. So Hirome is from a different discipline. She plays the piano, but she doesn't think about all these things. She doesn't think about the craft. She only thinks about the art, because she's got to that level where it all becomes second nature, and you can just kind of turn off your brain and just relax, and enjoy the process. And Sergei Kolosev, I think, is very clearly at that level as well. He's just drawn so many good shapes in his career that his hand just does it automatically. Like he might have an actual problem drawing a shape that isn't good. Um, so that's kind of the journey of learning to draw. It's the process of internalizing the craft and the technical, so that you have more brain power to focus and to enjoy, the actual art. So Sergei Kolosov, I think, maybe he's like Kim Jung-gi. Kim Jung-gi, he just draws straight away. Like when Kim Jung-gi draws, he draws like an eye with eyelashes and everything, and then builds an entire like 30-meter mural on top of that. Just goes from there in all directions. That's crazy. That's one way. Um, the other way is to make some planning. So I don't know which one of these Sergei Kolosev is. He probably, maybe he just, you know, makes a new canvas and just starts, scribbling and looking for good shapes and looking for what he actually wants to draw, and, makes all these cool kind of thingies, and then solidifies it over time. So that's one way. Another way um, is to go, okay, so I want to make this new painting. How do I do it? Okay, so I want to have like a podium with some guy there, like, and you make lots of thumbnails. You make lots of thumbnails, and for the podium, you have this guy, and you might be thinking, what kind of how do I want to draw them? How do I want to draw this guy? Um, like a circle? That doesn't work. Well, I want that gun sticking out, so something like that. I want him to be a big guy. I want him to be tough, so I make his upper section big, right? That kind of works. Then you have this gun here. And that's design. That's design thinking. Um, there's the intuitive process where you just use your intuition and you just kind of feel it. And then there's the planned process, which is what people who are either not intuitive or not trained as much or just prefer it that way use. I'm still not sure if that answers the question.
No, it does.
Yeah, I get off track easily, so you can just stop me if you feel like it. But I think Sergei Kolosev thinks about these things a little bit, but not nearly as much as not in their full complexity. If a beginner like some of us mere mortals wanted to make this painting, um, we would probably have to think, let's draw this guy, and you just okay. So what's the anatomy on the hand? Like is the bone here? Is it there? Like, what's the lighting? Is this too dark? Is it too dark or too light? And that's because you have to think about these things consciously. You haven't internalized them yet. So Kolesev just goes, yeah, okay, so I want one more guy here, and he's gonna be, in shadow, and his hand is gonna do something like that. And he just approaches it very lightly and in a relaxed way. And his hand does all the work. His hand does all the heavy lifting because it already knows how to do these things. Hmm. Lately, Sergei Kolesev, he started being a little more obvious about the shapes he uses. It's a more stylized, kind of more graphic approach. I'm not sure. Like it's a good painting. Kind of prefer the old style better, but like this figure is pretty cool. I mean, just look at how simple this is. You can clearly tell that they're having fun. They're having fun painting. A few more. So there's a drawing by Evan Amundsen. And this is kind of to show you that, like in the beginning, we had these obvious, obvious cartoony examples, and people sometimes think that shapes are only important for cartoons. Um, that's that's not true. These are still very good shapes. They're very simple, very deliberate. This huge thing here. Like the coat that is hanging off his arm, if it was just like that, it would be a little too simple. So he made this one more division here to kind of follow that form to further describe it. Smaller shapes here, because you have this big shape here, and then you kind of want to balance it. So you balance it with smaller shapes. And then you have, smaller shapes, and you balance that with another big shape. Lots of texture kind of here, lots of complex stuff. You balance it out with this head that's a little more light in tone. This is also by Evan Amundsen, and this is an interesting painting. It's not one of his, greatest or most famous, but I want you to notice, well, first of all, this guy. It's just, and the head is obviously the important part. That's where you want the viewer to look, okay? And you look at the head. Why? Because of this super helpful negative shape around it. Like that just, frames the head, like the head is a separate painting or something. And then this guy here in the background, look at that. I mean, that's funny. That's that's great. It reads as a goblin or some orc kind of, gnome thing, whatever. But it reads like that immediately, and it reads like that immediately because of these shapes, So he's got this round head, but then he's got this big ear and this huge nose. It's massive, just massive nose. And from afar, because of this simple shape division, it reads instantly as a goblin. Like, yeah, huge, massive nose. Like maybe Evan Amundsen, he asked, so I want to draw a goblin. What do I know about goblins? Okay, goblin. Hmm? Okay, they're small. And they got a big nose and big ears. So he takes that and just jams it into the drawing. So look at this guy's huge, and this goblin is small, and he's got a huge nose and a huge ear. The ear is kind of a little more complex, and it has this ear shape. Like the ear does kind of look like that. It has these S shapes, S curves on the inside, and the nose is really round and bulbous. So it works. It works. We've already seen that one before, but what I want you to notice here is these drawings and that one. Oh, that one. Those are shape compositions. So he's, putting together this canvas, this framing, and he's drawing shapes. Like, if you've gone through Drawbox or through dynamic sketching, they tell you to, take a form and then use hatching to kind of follow the form, right? Glenn Vilppu says that as well, but that's not what this guy wants. That's not what he wants, because following the form communicates volume, it communicates depth, but that's not what he wants. He wants to flatten it. He wants to focus purely on the two-dimensional shapes, so that's why he flattens the whole thing just into 2D shapes, because he wants to see if those 2D shapes still read well. Same with this one. He kind of has this this shape of this guy here, and then he has this notebook here. If it was like that, it wouldn't be as good. Instead, he kind of offsets it to break up that rhythm. Create a little overlap there, right? It's a better composition. And now we're getting into the really realistic. Anyone wants to take a guess who the painter behind this one is?
Sargent, obviously, or something like
Yep.
that at least.
Yep. Right. So Sargent, he's kind of famous for his really good shapes. So let's just look at this real quick. That's one. That's two. This could be simplified a little more. And then there's these huge, massive things on the side. Unfortunately, because he no longer, neither this lady nor Sargent are alive today, we don't really know what the still life looked like, what the model looked like in this clothing. But I guarantee you that it had more than 5 shapes. Well, it still does. You got all this texture, but like the statement behind these is so simple. This fabric probably had, like just weird everything, and he simplified it into this. Nice job, Sargent. And this one is, well, you don't get much closer to realism. This is by Norman Rockwell. So this helmet is a little larger than it should be. It looks like a freaking cooking pot. It's massive. And then this, look at this kind of, it's almost like a triangle, but it's a little rounded. So the cute little girl, she has this, when you isolate that shape, it looks like a doll, you know, because she is a doll, almost. That's how Rockwell perceives her. And you have this massive helmet on this soldier so that you don't forget that he's a soldier. Just makes it super obvious. So even at this level of realism, the artist still puts a lot of consideration into good shapes. All right. So shapes have properties. Can we think of a few? How about complexity? So shapes can be simple or they can be complex. They can be big or small. Any more ideas?
Can repeat.
Say what?
They can repeat.
Oh yeah, they can repeat.
Clearly defined boundaries.
Oh yeah, right. That's a good one. That's I had that on my list as well. So they can be defined, like clearly defined, or they can be implied. Right. I have one more on the list. That's symmetry. If anyone thinks of any more, there's probably an infinite way. Shapes is just these huge things, like like a huge bag. All this is shapes. And these are just the different ways you can kind of divide them and categorize them. But there's probably an infinite number of ways to do that. So simple shapes can be simple. That's a simple shape. It's a little less simple shape. That's an even less simple shape. That's a really not a simple shape. But you could still probably, turn it into a relatively simple one. Big or small, that's an obvious one. And you would probably want to have like a medium one in there. And obviously there's a gradient here, so you could have a little smaller than that, and a little smaller than that, and a little smaller. Usually you want to create these steps so that it's clear what is smaller than what. Repetition, that gets more into design. So when you repeat shapes over in your painting, you get a pattern. So that's a cool thing that they can do. They can be defined. So, you know, this is a clearly defined shape. What about this one? There's still a triangle, right? But I didn't define it. I kind of left it a little vague in these corners, and I let you do the rest of the work. You could, if you have a canvas, you could do something like that. And now you've implied that there's two rectangles, right? You could define only one part and make this one kind of foggy, you know? It still reads as a shape. And this last one is also pretty important. So symmetry in shapes is one of their probably almost like one of the most important properties that a shape can have. So this would be symmetrical. This would be a little less symmetrical, even less. And just if you do something crazy again, then there's no symmetry. Right. So that's a lot of, you know, shapes. They come in all shapes and sizes, if you can say that. But for now, we should probably keep things very simple, the same way we used to, you know, we looked at a bunch of different ways of how you can use a line and then simplified it into just C, S, and I. So for shapes, I would I would want you to focus only um, on simple and clearly defined ones. Also, remember how we said that shape is an enclosed line, so the line plays a big part in what the shape will look like. So remember that there are straights and there are curves. So straights are clear. They are clear about their direction, about their length, and about their angle, and many other ways. So to kind of ease into using more and more shapes in your work, I would ask you that you use about 80% straights. So if you're like, there are examples where you, for example, if you have a curve like this, it might be helpful to think of it as two straights like that. If you have an S curve, it's more helpful to think about it as kind of a Z shape. Only in situations where you have something like an arc like this. This would be pretty dumb to, break down like that. That's pretty dumb. So just do an arc. You can think of shapes as kind of like they're your soldiers, and you're a general planning your next battle. So imagine that, this is your canvas and the canvas is the battle, and the situation on the battle can change at any moment. Like maybe you have a bunch of small shapes going on. So what you need to do is send in a big one, right? Maybe you have a lot of round shapes. So maybe you want to send in a more rectangular one, a sharp one. But for now, let's start with only this kind of very simplified type of soldiers. There's one more thing that I would like to do. So again, you have, in real life doesn't care about good shapes. It provides you with shapes with just immeasurable complexity. And if you were to like copy this, you would draw like this huge complexity. So just when this is a good exercise when you're, walking about your daily life. Try to look at different objects and kind of simplify them. Right? I'm saying it's a good exercise because it's one of those very few that you can actually do without a pen and paper. Just anytime. When you're waiting for a bus, just look at something around you and try to break it down like that. How would I paint this? How would I draw this? Yeah, it's kind of just to demonstrate that point. Okay. Are you guys good? Does it still kind of we've said a lot of stuff. Yeah.
Is there a demo for this lesson?
A demo? Or what did
Yeah,
you?
sorry, I said, is there a demo for this lesson?
Oh yeah, sure. Sure. I'm still like if there's something that I left out in the actual lecture. So kind of to kind of summarize, we've introduced a new player to the game. After dot and line, we've created a shape. We know that shapes are everywhere in your picture. Your picture is made out of shapes. This is especially important for painting, but it's important for drawing as well, as we've seen in some of the examples. So not all shapes are created equal. They can do different things for you. If for some reason, like it hasn't happened to me much, but if for some reason you want to confuse your viewer, that may be the case. Like maybe you don't want to have a picture that reads well. Like maybe if it's like like a poster for a horror movie or a thriller, and you want the viewer to be confused, you just make, all kinds of wacky shapes. But usually we're after a simple and clear statement. So for now, we'll only think of good shapes as shapes that are simple, clearly defined, and yeah, that's pretty much it. Just simple and clear. Think simple and clear. Um, we also know that nature provides you with shapes that are usually not simple and clearly defined. So it's your job to do that. Um, we'll have exercises that will train your ability to think in 2D, to think in terms of shapes, to kind of see them more clearly. Um, for now, we should probably take a short break again. Let's do you guys want 5 or 10 minutes? Whatever.
10's fine.
10 is fine. Sure. We've talked for, man, an hour and a half. That's a lot. Okay, so let's do 10 minutes, stretch your legs, make some coffee, and when we're back, I'll talk some about exercises and then show you how to actually do them, how to draw shapes. Sounds good? All right. I'll maybe put together like a more elaborate, uh, more finished example, because there's probably a few people here falling asleep, which is perfectly reasonable. So just a few more notes. What I did a few times here was that I started off with like this is the thing. If you have an S-curve, for example, this is an S-curve, this is also an S-curve, and this is an S-curve as well. But they're different, right? So how do you do that? It's difficult to measure. It's really difficult if you keep it as an S-curve. So you ask yourself, okay, how do I break this down? Small one here, big one here. The apex is somewhere there, right? And one more here, okay? So you see this, but you put it down as this, right? You see that, but you put it down as that, okay? Because it's easy to measure. It's simplified. And then when when you're kind of going over it again, you can use that to put down the S-curve. And now it's accurate, right? So there was this in-between helping step using those helpful straight lines, right? It fits. Now you may be getting a déjà vu where we had those, points, right? Connecting them. Yeah. I promised you that we would start very simple and add complexity later. So if you can draw your straight lines and if you can draw your C-curves and your S-curves, and if you're confident in them, then you can rely on them to build a drawing that actually looks good. Right. So I'm gonna make a better example. Like this kind of works. It kind of gets the job done. But I would really like to take more time with this, but probably off camera. So let's just quickly summarize. Today we introduced a new thing, a new element, and that's a shape. We learned about shapes being, you know, everywhere and kind of comprising every drawing, and that they're pretty damn important. Like we went over all these amazing artist drawings, and they all had shapes that were clear, simple, and very intentional. None of it is an accident. None of it is an accident. Uh, and so it's in our best interest to kind of start to perceive those consciously. We had, you know, these two these two exercises that can help you quite a lot. You can pick, like I didn't say what kind of object you have to pick. It can be unbelievably simple, like a single coin or something, or it can be really complex, like a cityscape if you're feeling like that. But I would prefer that you use a uh, simple object and do it well. Okay, so quality beats quantity in this case, at least. Right. So in summary, we learned that good drawings are made out of good lines, right? Good shapes, and in the next week's lesson, we're going to introduce one more player to the scene. Okay. Wink. Okay.